In the United States, rent alone is enough to make many people feel like they're running out of breath. Not because they are poor, but because life, year after year, has simply become too expensive to breathe. Bills arrive more reliably than check-in phone calls, and the anxiety is no longer about luxury, but about the most basic needs: a roof over your head, a decent meal, a visit to the doctor. The problem was never the quality of the people. It's not because someone failed, worked less, or made the wrong choices. It's because the cost of survival has risen faster than what many people can realistically carry. When most of your daily energy is spent calculating whether money will last until the end of the month, the idea of quality of life slowly turns into a luxury. This video is not saying that $175 a month delivers a perfect life. It doesn't promise paradise. It doesn't sell a rose-colored retirement dream. It simply asks a different question many people have never had the space to consider. What happens when money is no longer the first worry? Every morning, you wake up. When rent no longer dominates your thoughts. When buying groceries, seeing a doctor, or turning on the lights no longer requires careful calculation. In this video, we'll explore 3 different countries, not glamorous destinations, not places heavily marketed to foreigners. Each one will be examined slowly and honestly, from housing, food, healthcare, and visa options, to daily rhythm, and most importantly, real people who are already living, working, and growing older there. Not to show how cheap life can be, but to understand the true cost of living with less pressure. But one thing needs to be clear from the very beginning: this is not for everyone. And it is definitely not a permanent vacation. These choices require acceptance, adaptation, and real trade-offs. They are not meant for those seeking maximum comfort. They are for those searching for something else: relief. So stay until the end of the video. Because the final country on this list isn't for people looking to live more comfortably. It's for people who want to live lighter. Country 3. Albania. Albania appears in this video not because it's famous, but because it's largely overlooked. This is Europe yet, without the financial pressure people associate with modern Europe. There are no glossy retirement ads here, no carefully staged images selling a dream. And that absence becomes its advantage. When expectations are low, satisfaction comes easier. Albania doesn't promise an ideal life. It quietly removes some of the weight many people have been carrying for decades. You're still in Europe, surrounded by old architecture, slow rhythms, sidewalk cafes, and long afternoons. But the cost of living feels closer to Eastern Europe, sometimes even lower. Albania doesn't impress you on day one. It doesn't overwhelm you. What it offers instead is something subtler and far rarer: the feeling of not being constantly under pressure. With about $175 a month, you're not buying comfort. But in coastal towns like Durrës, that amount can still rent a small room or a simple studio in a local neighborhood. Nothing luxurious, nothing modern, but clean, secure, and filled with natural light. In the morning, Mediterranean sunlight enters through an old window frame, not resort light, just honest light that reminds you you're living in a real place, not boxed in by expensive walls. John lives there. He's 62, a former electrician from the United States. He didn't leave America because of a single crisis. He left because he was tired of waking up every morning with rent as the first thought in his head. His income is about $1,200 a month from Social Security. In Albania, he rents a room for around $180 after negotiating a long-term agreement. Not the cheapest option, but one that lets him sleep without tension. John once said something simple, yet deeply revealing: "Don't live like a king. But for the first time in 30 years, I don't worry about rent." When housing stops feeling like a monthly threat, the rest of life naturally becomes lighter. Not because there's more money, but because money stops dictating your mood every day. Daily life in Albania is uncomplicated. John shops at local markets, where vegetables, fruit, bread, and cheese are inexpensive enough that constant calculation isn't necessary. He eats out at small neighborhood spots, not fine dining, just warm, filling meals. Healthcare isn't perfect, but it's affordable. For basic needs, both public and private care are accessible, often paid in cash, without the fear of crushing medical bills. Legally, Albania offers a rare sense of breathing room. U.S. citizens can stay visa-free for up to 1 year. No complicated paperwork, no heavy financial proof, no pressure to decide everything immediately. Of course, trade-offs exist. English isn't widely spoken outside major areas. Infrastructure is uneven. Things don't always run smoothly, and patience becomes part of daily life. Albania isn't for people chasing perfection. It won't excite you. It won't impress your friends back home. It does something far quieter and far more important. It helps you breathe evenly again. Country. 2. Morocco. Morocco is not a place for those seeking absolute quiet. Silence is rare here. Sound fills the day from voices calling out in the market, motorbikes slipping through narrow streets. Tea being poured in small cafes, children running across courtyards. Yet within that constant motion, Morocco carries something unmistakable. It feels alive. Not a performance staged for visitors, but real life unfolding every day. More importantly, Morocco has preserved something many modern societies have lost: a living sense of community. People here do not live in isolation. They know who you are where you live and whether you've been around lately. Vendors remember regulars. Neighbors notice when your door hasn't opened. For many older adults, this feeling is both unfamiliar and deeply familiar. At the same time, it recalls a period when life wasn't fractured by packed schedules, social media, and permanently closed doors. Living in Morocco on about $175 a month requires a reset of expectations from the very beginning. You won't be in tourist centers or apartments designed for foreigners. Instead, you'll rent a small room in an old riad or a modest space in a local residential neighborhood. Nothing modern, no soundproofing, no premium amenities. But in exchange, daily expenses are low, food is abundant, and basic needs are close at hand: markets, bakeries, small eateries, pharmacies. Linda lives in Essaouira, a coastal city where ocean winds blow year-round, and life moves more slowly than in major urban centers. She's 58, a widow, and formerly worked in a small library in the United States. Her income is about $1,100 a month. After her husband passed away, what weighed on her most wasn't only grief, but the feeling of shrinking into an expensive, isolating life where neighbors didn't know each other's names and days passed in silence. In Essaouira, Linda rents a small room tucked inside a local neighborhood far from tourist streets. Each morning, she walks to the market to buy fresh fish, vegetables, and bread. The vendors know her, ask how she's doing, sometimes save the best fish for her. Those brief, ordinary exchanges slowly become part of her life. Linda once put it simply, "Here, I'm not treated like a useless old person. I'm a neighbor." Food in Morocco is closely tied to the home kitchen and the rhythm of daily life. Markets are inexpensive, fresh, and plentiful. Linda rarely eats at restaurants aimed at tourists. She cooks at home slowly and regularly, not because she has to count every dollar, but because that's how people live here. Choosing ingredients. Cooking and eating at set times becomes a quiet healing routine rather than a burden. Healthcare in Morocco is not perfect, but private healthcare is affordable, especially in coastal cities like Essaouira. For basic needs, many foreigners pay out of pocket because costs are low enough that a doctor's visit doesn't turn into long-term anxiety. The coastal climate, cooler, breezy, and far less harsh than the interior, also helps many older adults feel physically better day to day. Still, Morocco is not for everyone. Cultural differences are real. The pace of work is slow. Administrative paperwork can drag on and rarely follows the logic many Westerners expect. This is not a country for people who need tight control, precise schedules, and predictable outcomes. In Morocco, you learn to wait. You learn to adapt. You learn to accept that not everything is within your control. Morocco is not easy. But if you learn to let go of expectations of control, of constant comparison, it gives back a great deal. Country 1. Nicaragua. Nicaragua takes the #1 spot not because it's easy and not because it offers a life of abundance. It stands here for a very specific reason. In Nicaragua, $175 doesn't just allow you to exist, it allows you to build a structured daily life. A life where the day doesn't begin with the question, will the money be enough, but with a different one. How do I want to live today? In many places, $175 is only a theoretical number. In Nicaragua, that number takes shape. It becomes a room, a street, a familiar walking route, a small cafe that opens at the same time each morning. When the cost of living drops low enough, life doesn't become chaotic, it becomes clearer. Days gain definition. Decisions feel lighter. In cities like Granada and Leon, $175 can cover a small room in a local neighborhood, not near resorts, not designed for short-term tourists. These are streets where people live real lives, where walking is the main mode of transportation, and where faces become familiar within weeks. Daily expenses are so low that owning a vehicle isn't necessary. Life contracts into a small walkable radius, and that compression makes it easier to manage mentally and financially. Mark and Susan live this way. They're both in their early 60s. They didn't come to Nicaragua to retire, and they don't describe their life as an escape. Mark teaches English part-time to local children and a few online students. Susan makes simple handmade crafts and sells them online to repeat customers back in the US. Their income isn't large, but it's steady. And more importantly, it's enough. Mark once said it plainly, "We didn't retire. We just slowed down." Their mornings start early, not out of urgency, but because that's the natural rhythm of life here. Mark walks to his classes. Susan goes to the market to buy materials. At midday, they return home to cook and rest. In the afternoon, Susan works with her hands while Mark prepares lessons. Days don't slip away unnoticed. Each one has its own shape. Healthcare is one of the reasons many older adults feel more at ease in Nicaragua. Private healthcare is affordable, accessible, and usually paid directly. Common health concerns don't turn into long-term anxiety. People go to the doctor when they need to, not after weeks of hesitation. That alone changes how safe life feels on a daily basis. When it comes to residency, Nicaragua doesn't place excessive barriers in front of foreigners planning to stay longer. The process is relatively straightforward and predictable, allowing people to think in months and years rather than weeks. As with anywhere else, safety depends largely on choosing the right area. In the right neighborhoods, daily life unfolds calmly and routinely. Of course, Nicaragua asks for acceptance. Political conditions require awareness. Infrastructure varies. Internet connections can be slow or unreliable at times. Life here isn't built around instant convenience. It requires flexibility and a certain level of patience. But in return, Nicaragua offers something increasingly rare. You're not richer here. But money no longer dictates your mood every single day. And for many people, that alone is enough to begin again. $175 is not a promise. It doesn't guarantee happiness. It doesn't commit to an easy life. And it doesn't sell a perfect dream. $175 is simply a test, a very honest test of what happens when financial pressure is lifted even partially from everyday life. When money is no longer at the center of every decision, when worry is no longer the first thing that appears each morning. The three countries we've talked about don't represent paradise. They represent different choices, different ways of living, and very real trade-offs. None of them is right for everyone, but each one raises the same question, a question most people rarely have the time or mental space to ask while they're caught inside an expensive, fast-moving routine. How much comfort do you actually need to feel like you have enough? How much space? How much speed? How much convenience? Before life feels good. And when a choice has to be made, what do you fear losing more, the familiar convenience you've lived with for years, or the mental lightness that comes when money no longer weighs on you every day? Maybe you won't move anywhere at all. Maybe you'll just watch this video and return to life as it is. And that's perfectly fine, because the purpose of this video was never to push you to leave, but to create a pause, a quiet moment long enough to look at the years ahead from a different angle, slower and more honest. If you've started rethinking your life, your pace, and how you want to grow older, follow the channel. We'll keep asking difficult questions, but they'll be real ones.